Hello everyone and welcome back to Beatley Tone's Beatles channel. Lovely to have you here. Thanks for joining me for this video. Hope you're all doing well. In today's video I'm going to be reviewing Midas Man, the new Brian Epstein biopic that's just dropped on Amazon Prime. If you've got Amazon Prime, you can stream it for free, and I think it's been streaming since yesterday, the 30th of October. And yes, so you can go and watch it for free on Amazon Prime if you've got it. Now, a couple of things I should mention before I get into the review. The first thing is that this review contains spoilers. So if you want to go and watch it without knowing anything about the film, then you might want to switch the video off now and come back to it after you've watched the film. The second thing is that I should mention that I do have some bias here because I'm not a big fan of the genre that is the biopic. I'm not a big fan of it, and the reason for that is that if the subject of the biopic is someone that I care about, I never think that the length of the movie, be it an hour and a half, hour and 40, or in the case of Midas Man, an hour and 50 minutes, is long enough to tell a life story properly. But bearing in mind that Brian's life was so short, he died at the age of 32, I had thought that maybe an hour and 50 might be enough to tell the important parts of his story. I'm not going to tell you now whether I think that that was achieved or not, but that's how I feel. So basically what I'm saying is that I do have a bias against biopics in general. So if I say that I dislike something or I like something, it doesn't mean that you will too. It doesn't make it fact. It is just my opinion, and you might think something completely opposite. So I should point out that I do have a slight bias against biopics. So the film, we kind of know the outlines of the Brian Epstein story, and the sort of the film sort of starts off with him telling his mum and dad, Harry and Queenie, that he would like a little section in their store to sell records, which they reluctantly agree to, and within, I don't know, months or whatever, he's got the NEMS store, and he is being constantly asked for this record called My Bonnie by the Beatles. So he hops along to the Cavern to go and watch them. And if you've been to the Cavern recently, particularly if you've been to the bit that is called the Cavern Lounge. So the Cavern, the recreation of the Cavern has got the sort of the arched sort of cave part with a little stage at the front, but there is now a bit at the back that they call the Cavern Lounge, and that is where they have the tribute acts on, usually at weekends. And if you go to see any of those tribute acts in Liverpool at the Cavern Lounge, you will have to queue up around the back of the cavern to get into the Cavern Lounge part. And in the film, the main entrance to the cavern was that back entrance that we see round the back of Matthew Street. So he goes to watch the Beatles. They're on stage in their leather jackets and all the rest of it. They're playing some other guy, and my first sort of gripe is, I know that they would have had to fill the cavern with extras, but it doesn't. They haven't really captured the scene, because the cavern doesn't really look that packed as it would have been during a lunchtime session, and sweat dripping off the ceiling, and Brian, who is mesmerised by what he sees on stage, is quite comfortable in his suit and his tie and all the rest of it, which he certainly wouldn't have been, I don't think. And he goes backstage after the gig, tells them that he wants to be their manager, and he gets introduced to all of the Beatles, John, Paul, George and Pete. And he says he wants to be the manager. They say, well, we've already got a manager. And the next scene sort of cuts to Eddie Izzard, comedian Eddie Izzard. Have I just dead named him? I'm not sure. I think he might be called Susie now. I'm not sure. But he plays Alan Williams, the Beatles' first manager. And again, I think this is a bad bit of casting for me personally, because I can't stand Eddie Izzard. I can't stand him as a stand-up comedian. And in this film, if he'd been half as funny as the real Alan Williams, then it might have been a little bit more realistic and a better casting decision. But he's nowhere near as funny as the real Alan Williams. If you ever read Alan Williams' book, The Man Who Gave Away the Beatles, it is hilarious. It is hilarious. And Alan Williams tells Brian that, if he wants to be the Beatles manager, then they owe him £9.10 in unpaid commission. So, Brian doesn't have a problem with that whatsoever. So we see the Beatles signing their contract with Brian, and then from that moment, the film moves at quite a rapid pace. Within a sort of a minute of them signing the contract, they are in suits, they've got Beatles haircuts, and they're learning how to bow. It then moves quite swiftly onto the Decca audition, 1st of January 1962, in the snow. We don't see that, but we see the Beatles come out of the studios at the end of it, and John Lennon is absolutely furious. He's blaming Pete Best because he's drumming too fast, asking how much coffee he drunk before the audition. He's angry with Brian as well, but Brian manages to settle him down and say, look, listen, John, no one cares more about your future than me. You won't find anyone that will care more about your future than me. And John has to admit that is probably true. We then see Brian meeting Dick Rowe and some other bods from Decca in some sort of gentleman's club in London, where they obviously get, he gets told it's a no from Decca, and Dick Rowe, describes the Beatles' audition performance as absolute bilge. And Brian says, well, you don't understand what you're turning down. The Beatles are going to be bigger than Elvis. And to that comment, Brian gets laughed out of the room by the various bods from Decca. Well, who's laughing now, Mr. Dick, so-called Rowe? And then we see, without actually hearing any dialogue, we see Brian going from label to label to label to label, getting a no from all of them, until eventually ends up in front of George Martin at Parlophone, and he listens to the tape and says, okay, let's get them down. And the next thing we see them in Abbey Road, Studio 2, playing Besame Mucho, and doing a very good performance. The band do a very good performance of it. At the end of it, George Martin, and the George Martin character, whose name is Charlie Palmer Rothwell. Haven't actors got posh names these days? Charlie Palmer Rothwell is George Martin, and he's got, it's a small part. He really only appears in this scene as a talking part anyway. But he's got all George Martin's mannerisms, off to a T. He does well. He says that he likes Paul's voice. John needs to work on his voice, and he says to Pete, you need to be more precise. But in actual fact, on the basis of the performance that we see of them in Abbey Road, the actor slash musician who plays Pete Best does absolutely nothing wrong during that song. He plays it really well, and if the real Pete Best had played as well as that actor slash musician, he probably would never have been sacked. So as we know, George Martin doesn't feel that Pete Best is a good enough drummer to record with. So it's down to Brian to sack Pete, which is a difficult conversation for Brian, and obviously Pete is very upset, and he's very angry as well as he gets up and walks out the room. he says the fans will never forgive you. Not forgetting is how Liverpool survives. And I thought that was the best line in the whole movie, because that is so true. We've seen it time and time again. If people from outside of Liverpool, put down Liverpool or Liverpudlians, Scousers never forget. We saw it with the British tabloid The Sun newspaper, who wrote bad things about the people at the Hillsborough disaster. They've never forgot that, and no shops in Liverpool will sell The Sun from 1989 to the present day. That doesn't happen. We've seen the Thatcher's Tory government and other Tory governments since that, who have done terrible things in Liverpool. And even our own Ringo Starr was foolish enough to put down the city of Liverpool when he was there in 2008, when Liverpool was the European City of Culture, and he played a concert to celebrate that. He said some bad things about Liverpool, and even their own son, they did not forget. Statues that he had around the city were defaced. There was a Beatles hedge where they cut off Ringo's head from that, so they never forgot. And so I thought that was a brilliant line. Now, I'm not going to go through everything that happens in this film, but I do want to talk about certain aspects of it. Now, obviously, as we know, Brian was a homosexual, and that is covered in this film, several times over. Homosexuality was illegal in Britain in this part of the 60s. So this left Brian and his Brian, when he had these sort of encounters, subject to abuse. He'd either be robbed, or he'd be mugged. He'd be mugged, or he'd be beaten up, or he would be subject to blackmail, that sort of thing. We see one encounter that happens sort of under a bridge on a dark night by the docks, where the police come, and you hear the police whistle, as they used to do in the 60s. The Bobby on the beat would blow a whistle when they saw an offence. They might as well have just said, "Oi, you!" There's nothing like approaching someone that's created an offence subtly. Blow a whistle at them, that'll stop them. So you kind of see that, but obviously this caused Brian a lot of anguish and a lot of hurt. There's also an ongoing relationship with an American actor who he had a relationship with, and who stole a briefcase from his house that contained a lot of cash and a lot of contracts and stuff like that. So that is well covered in the film, and it's really hard these days to put yourself in that place of how difficult that would have been for gay men in the early 60s and stuff like that. Now, one thing that you will notice in this film is that there clearly is no permission to use original Beatles music in this film. And so no Lennon McCartney, no George Harrison songs are featured, but they are allowed to use the covers that the Beatles did. So we see, some other guy and a couple of other songs that I can't quite remember. But that, if you are allowed to use covers, then make it factually correct. There is a glaring plot hole, or factual error in this film, and it concerns the Royal Command performance in 1963, where John does the people in the cheap posh seats can rattle their jolly, the rest of you clap your hands. That one, where in the actual show, that was the introduction to their final song of their set, which was Twist and Shout, which obviously was a cover. So why not have Twist and Shout being performed after John does that in the movie? No, they play money. I don't know why. I do not understand that at all. But what we have to remember is that this isn't a Beatles film. This is Brian Epstein's life story. So, you know, there are other aspects to his life apart from the Beatles, but they make such a big thing of the Beatles relationship in this. But Brian had a whole, you know, stable of people that he turned into stars. You know, the film's called Midas Man, the man, and, you know, everything he touches turns to gold, which wasn't necessarily true, but he did, certainly not true as far as the Beatles concerned, but he did turn, you know, a few average bands into #1 recording artists. Jerry and the Pacemakers, Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas, but they are hardly mentioned in the film. But one of his stable that does get a fair hearing is Cilla Black, and Cilla is played brilliantly by an actress called Darcy Shaw, and she is great. She's got all the mannerisms, she's got the voice and everything, and the relationship between Cilla and Brian is depicted beautifully. It's very clear from the scenes that they play together that she absolutely loved him and he absolutely loved her, and that is a beautiful moment in the film. Other brilliant performances I thought was Emily Watson as Queenie Epstein. You know, they resisted the temptation to play the sort of, you know, to play her as the you know, the cliched Jewish mother, but, you know, she wasn't happy with his lifestyle and all that sort of thing. And Eddie Marsan as Harry Epstein was brilliant as well. Very difficult relationship with his son. He didn't sort of understand, you know, the fact that he was a gay man or wanted to manage a pop group. He wanted him to carry on in the family business and all that sort of thing. So those were two good performances. So let's talk about Brian. So Brian was played by Jacob Fortune Lloyd, another posh name as well. And, you know, he plays the part of Brian Epstein. You know, he's a very likeable character. But one thing that they do in this film is they skip over great big chunks of the story by having Brian talk directly to us, the audience, directly at the camera. And it works, but it means that the, you know, great big chunks of history are missed out. You know, he talks you through the touring years and stuff like that, and we don't ever see the Beatles playing live once they, you know, are famous, apart from that Royal, you know, Variety, you know, the Royal Command performance. And I'm not sure, you know, he does come over as really likeable, but for me in this film, he comes over a little bit too, you know, cheeky chappy, gives the odd wink here and there, and I don't see Brian as that sort of cheeky chappy. I see Brian as a much more serious, troubled character. But, you know, Jacob Fortune Lloyd, he plays the part well, but I'm not sure that the script serves Brian Epstein's real personality that well. Let's talk about the Beatles themselves. Again, you know, they're all sort of we've got quite posh names. George was played by someone called Leo Harvey Elledge, and he I mean, I don't expect in biopics for the actors to be spitting images of the people that they're playing. You know, if they, you know, can carry off some of the mannerisms they make, it makes them more believable. George reminded me more of Dave Hill out of Slade. It looked like he had too many teeth for his mouth to hold. He's very sort of, you know, goofy and very, very toothy. John was played by someone called Jonah Lees, and you know, he probably had the biggest talking part. Now, the problem that I've got with John is he's a really tiny John. He's a really tiny John. And when you see them all together, you can see that he's the smallest in the band, which wasn't real. You know, Ringo towers above him. So that wasn't good. I thought the best of the Beatles was the guy that played Paul, who was called Blake Richardson, and another posh name. He did the wobbly head thing, and he had some of the mannerisms, and he did a fairly good job. One of my little gripes about this film is that I was quite looking forward to seeing them create a set that kind of looked like 1960s Liverpool, and they didn't really attempt to do that at all. I was quite hoping to see some vintage cars and that sort of thing, and the shops and stuff like that, but they didn't do that. They used some real footage from the 60s to show the shops and all that, but I was a bit disappointed they didn't even bother to show, to try and create a sort of a 1960s Liverpool budget, say. But what they did do in Liverpool is, I'm sure you've all seen the James Corden carpool karaoke, where Paul plays a little mini gig in a pub. Well, that pub that he plays in is the Philharmonic in Liverpool. And if you've ever been in that pub, particularly if you've ever been in the gents' toilets in that pub, you will have recognised them as being the toilets that are supposed to be at the Decca studios where they did the audition on January the 1st, 1962. So the clip that they show of Brian in the toilets at Decca is actually filmed in the Philharmonic pub in Liverpool, because if you've ever been in there, they're instantly recognisable because they're so ornate, and you see them in that part of the film. Now, another part that I found really irritating and totally unnecessary is a scene of Brian walking across the zebra crossing at Abbey Road, and in the scene you can see the white Volkswagen car as per the Abbey Road cover that didn't happen until 2 years after his death. Why did they put that in? It's totally unnecessary and totally pointless. Now, the film ends with Our World broadcast of, All You Need Is Love. But of course, they can't show any Lennon McCartney songs, so we don't see them doing the actual performance. And the whole point of that scene, that final scene that happens just before Brian's death, is that the Beatles and Brian have a group hug. And I don't know why they used that. And I think I do know why. It's because that is probably the closest event to Brian's death. But only a few days before that was recorded, there was the launch of Sgt. Pepper. Now, Sgt. Pepper doesn't even get a mention in the film, and we know that this was an album that Brian was very proud of, and the actual launch for the Sgt. Pepper album took place in Brian's apartment. Now, why didn't they use that for the Beatles and Brian to have this group hug? Because they wanted this nice little ending that the Beatles and Brian were so together that they wanted that before the death. That's what I think that they should have done. They should have used the Sgt. Pepper launch, because they wouldn't have needed to not have any music. They could have just had a party round at Brian's, and they could have had the group hug and be done with it. But they didn't do that. Brian's actual death is not covered at all. It's covered by just subtitles at the end saying that he died of an accidental overdose. So we don't really see, it doesn't really make sense, because the last thing we see in the film is Brian and the Beatles having a group hug, and the next thing is we get a notification that Brian's dead a couple of months later. So they didn't really show how unhappy he was in his life, it was an accidental overdose. But obviously he's a very you know, is in a very bad place at that time, you know, drinking lots and taking lots of different pills. That they didn't bother to show that in any detail, which is, you know, it's okay for us because we know the story. But if you're a young person or you're not particularly a Beatles fan and you're watching this film, it makes no sense whatsoever. So that is another little gripe from me. But, you know, generally I think this film is very watchable. You know, it moves at a decent pace. If you can ignore the factual errors in the film, the fact that there's no you know, original music in the film, it's okay, but it has got lots of failings, I think. And you know, if I'm giving it a Rotten Tomatoes score out of 5, I'm kind of, you know, 2.5 stars, 3 stars maybe for this film. You know, you, as I say, it is really watchable, but you've got to kind of take off your Beatles head and you know, just view it for what it is, as entertainment. And it is pretty entertaining, but you know, it's not a great film, and it really hasn't changed my mind about biopics. And what is also annoying on Amazon Prime is there's 2 advert breaks during the film, which is pretty annoying. But talking about advert breaks, if you have come across this channel for the first time and you've got this far in the video, you will know that you haven't seen any adverts up until this point. That is because I don't have adverts in my videos mid-roll, which means that you can watch my videos from start to finish without being interrupted with an advert for dog food or life insurance or Jet2 holidays. So that's a great reason to subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed, that you can watch the videos from start to finish. Okay, well, if you've seen Midas Man, you know, tell me what you think of it down in the comments. You know, I'll read all your comments and I will respond to all your comments. That is pretty much it from me for this video. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye bye.